I asked this morning to be with me, and I'm privileged to have him, Attorney Justin Phelps. He is an expert dispute resolution practice. He's an attorney, of course. He was called to the bar of England and Wales in 1995, and Trinidad and Tobago he was called here in 1996. Let me say a very good morning to you, Attorney Justin Phelps. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. How are you doing?
As good as I can on a morning after I, like the rest of the nation, just trying to digest, not so much digest the loss of the former prime minister, but I guess encouraged, and in some way I wondered where all the goodness that I hear coming out yesterday and the days that preceded yesterday in recognition of a contribution. Sometimes I wondered, it's almost rhetorical I say this, sometimes I wonder why we have to wait this late to say how we feel about someone who take their life, take their time and go out in the public square to serve.
Yes, we should probably be doing more during the lifetime of our statesmen. And I think one of the prominent examples of that is our Calypso fraternity, who I think do not get the recognition that they deserve during the course of their lives, and yes, for whom a lot more could be done.
You're quite right. Black Stallion is such an example. Oh, by the way, the Mighty Sparrows are still basking in this celebration. He turned 81 yesterday. Just as you mentioned, it is a good aside.
Yes. Yes.
So good morning to you, Brady. Let us get on with the business at hand here. I only have a half hour with you, and there is so much I know I can extract from you. The Miscellaneous Act. It includes the anti-gang legislation and the Bail Act. It was touted as an integral part in crime fighting in Trinidad and Tobago. In your view, why did this umbrella legislation not get the support of the opposition in the first instance and the Law Association in the second instance? Why you think there was not the support coming from the opposition when the legislation was passed during their tenure at the helm?
I cannot give you a fair answer to why the opposition did not support the bill that they themselves put forward to Parliament as good law during their tenure. All I can rely on is what I've read as being their position in the newspapers, which is inconsistent with having put the bill forward as a crime-fighting tool to start with. I'm afraid that because the opposition has been in government and has proven themselves to be what they are, I cannot ascribe any better motive than politics.
Because it is equally inconsistent with me that when the legislation was passed, the request I am hearing for performance data, I would assume that would have been included in the consideration. A body would have been set up, and thus we all would have been able to pull from that body if the legislation was thought out totally in the context that there is a sunset clause. Well, let us have somewhere we are calling for the performance data from. That's what they asked for, and if they couldn't answer where this information is stored, I am flawed.
Precisely. A particular bill is only according to the way our government is supposed to work. A particular bill is only one element in a governmental policy. And if they had, that is, if the People's Partnership had a policy, an anti-crime policy, you would have expected that they had a certain course intended for that bill once they put it before Parliament and sought the support of Parliament to pass it into law. So their position is inconsistent. Unfortunately, the irresistible conclusion is that the People's Partnership, now in opposition, is prepared to play politics with crime fighting.
And at the end of the day, that is something you don't want to play politics with. One is well advised not to. However, you are also an attorney. The Law Association was not in praise, as it were, of this legislation. Explain your why.
I think that the Law Association is concerned, and rightly so, about the constitutional implications of having persons presumed to be innocent held without bail for a substantial period. And I think that one of their concerns is that there is no statistical evidence that the bill is going to assist at the same time as taking away a person's constitutional right to apply for bail. I think that is a valid concern, and I would align myself with what the Law Association has said. They've also made a point with which I agree. I'm not sure that it is the point that the Law Association made, but it is alluded to, and that is that unless the population is told how this bill is supposed to work as part of a larger government policy to fight crime, then there's no validity in simply removing the right to bail and having persons who may very well be innocent incarcerated for substantial periods of time.
I, too, am disquieted by some aspects of this, specifically in the area of the Bail Act itself. However, as you said, we have no data to support the implementation. It has been implemented, so it would be the continuance, which is the renewal of.
Yes.
Then is it unreasonable for the present government to say if the measure was not put in place to collect the information, give us a renewal on this one with another sunset date, and we will make sure that we have alongside that the data collection ability and report, i.e. in 6-8 months on a 6 or 8 month basis. Would that be a good argument?
It is not a bad argument, but it is not a right argument or a wrong argument either. I think what the government is saying is, look, we need time to put together the statistical evidence to support this bill. And in the meantime, we believe that it would be useful in deterring serious crime if we continue the bill. So the government's position is, give us 24 months. We will produce the statistical evidence or not, and make a decision as to whether the bill ought to continue then. The difficulty with that is that the Law Association rightly points out that whilst we have this statistical data collection process going on, we are taking away from a particular class of society the right to apply for bail, and to put it more positively, we are incarcerating them on the basis that we expect to have the statistical support for the bill at a later date.
And you cannot incarcerate people on that basis.
So I think that there's no right or wrong, but I think in balancing the question, I think the Law Association is probably nearer the safer course, and that is, let us work with not incarcerating persons. And when you get the statistical data, if it establishes that this bill is a good thing, then the Law Association, no doubt, would reverse its position on that basis and support the bill.
Attorney Justin Philip Phelps is my guest. We are saying then, without the two-thirds majority to extend this, there is no way constitutionally an extension can take place. Are we categorical on that?
Yes, I believe the majority required is 3/5, not 2/3. And I think that must be right, because there are constitutional implications, and therefore the House needs to be nearer to unanimity than it otherwise would have to be.
The Attorney General, Faris Sarwari, warns the public of mass requests for bail that will be sought on or after August 15th, in the context that I get the feeling that what he's saying, without us getting the extension, the renewal of this, we are going to have mass chaos. I wonder if that is an indictment of our system to safeguard the nation. How do you interpret what the Attorney General is saying when he warns the public of this mass request of 1,000+ people seeking bail?
No, I think when I read the Attorney General's position on that, I think that he is doing his job. He is anticipating the workload that may or may not come to the judiciary. And he is saying that it is something that needs to be prepared for. I think the deeper question is whether the judiciary has the resources it requires to deal with that. But there is nothing wrong with a flood of bail applications if the justice of the case is that these persons ought not to be in prison. The second thing is that when each bail application, each of the 1,300 is made, each would be decided on its own merit.
Exactly.
And therefore we can be sure that the right thing is being done by these persons who are before the courts. The real question there, I think, and what the Attorney General may have been alluding to, is that the judiciary needs funds. It is an underfunded judiciary. We have insufficient judges, insufficient courts, insufficient magistrates, insufficient prison conditions, and the rest of it. But that is a larger issue.
In the context of where we are as far as revenue and the economy is, there are a lot of calls being made because there are a number of areas that are deficient. So the call that you are making indirectly for the Law Association to have more resources, I don't know if the country can support it, or are you saying there are some things that you find the money for up front, otherwise you'll have to use it heavily on the back end?
Well, I am not speaking about the Law Association.
Not the Law Association. I meant the judiciary. I apologize.
Yes, the judiciary, I think, needs funding. There are many integral parts of our democratic society that are underfunded, with the result that the people of Trinidad and Tobago do not receive what they are entitled under the Constitution to receive. So yes, I think that the judiciary ought to be better funded. I think that the Children's Authority ought to be better funded. I think that if you look at our society today, all of the vulnerable people, including persons facing the courts and children, women, elderly, are not receiving under a democratic system of government what they're entitled to be receiving. And that is not a political question. That has nothing to do with the People's Partnership. It has nothing to do with the People's National Movement. It has to do with the way the institutions of the society are working and the fact that we have a state which is, as distinct from a government, a state that is in decay.
I had a guest very early, Ian Ramdani, and we were talking about the situation with the judiciary there. One of the discussions, one of the aspects of our discussion dealt with the bail and the percentage of bail. How is bail done? What percentage is actually in cash? Because there have been calls for cash to be something to be considered taken as part of bail as against real estate. Explain how what is the composition of bail whenever it's granted?
I am not a criminal practitioner, so I am not the best person to answer that question.
Okay.
But I think that the judiciary and the magistracy have been doing, as far as I am aware, a reasonable job at weighing the bail applications coming before them to make sure that it is not prohibitive. So, for example, you will not take a bail application from an accused earning $2,500 a month and grant him bail of $50,000 or whatever it might be. I know that there are other considerations in criminal law, which is the seriousness of the offense, or whether the accused might be a flight risk and that type of thing. But as far as I am aware, there has not been a serious question raised as to bail conditions imposed being unreasonable or prohibitive.
As an attorney and a citizen, you have been looking on this situation like we all are. Causation, I believe, is the reason for everything. So whether we acknowledge it or not, quite frankly, it instructs my question to you. Why do you think our crime rate is so high and continues to escalate?
Because we have done nothing about it, and because we have been fighting crime as an existence of its own. Crime to us exists on its own. So we want to prosecute persons who hold up a supermarket. We want to prosecute the murderers. All of that is perfectly correct, and we have to do it. But behind the crime, there must be a cause. And what we have never tackled, let me be careful, we have not only tackled it, we have promoted it. And that is the cause of crime. That is inequality in the country and poverty. So the cause is not being attended to. We are actively promoting a system in which the cause is compounded and worsens every day. And then we deal with the criminals as accused, prosecute, and incarcerate.
a broken social contract leading to wants in certain parts of the society, and that is why you believe in some area we see this increase of crime. Am I correct? Did I gather correctly from what you said?
Absolutely. This is a patently unjust society. It is a society in which children, each day that you and I wake up and breathe in Trinidad and Tobago, they are abused children who cannot be accommodated by our system because the Children's Authority is underfunded. There are cases in this country where 13-year-old girls who have been abused at home have to be sent back to the home in which the abuse occurred because we are underfunded and do not have the infrastructure to deliver protection to them. In those circumstances, to tell me that what we need is a crime-fighting plan directed at prosecution and apprehension of criminals is insufficient because the problem is going to continue to be there, and I think that there is empirical evidence of that. We've had a soaring crime problem through administrations for more than 10 years, and when we speak about alleviating poverty in Trinidad and Tobago, there are tidy narratives that are plucked out and applied to the persons committing crime that are unsuitable, unjust, unfair, and we are festering and nurturing and minding in this country resentment that one day is going to explode, and I don't know where it will be channeled towards.
Deriving the conclusion from information that's available. I mean, a lot of folks see this. There are a lot of people who understand it. Yet one wonder, why is it those in governance don't see the need to correct the marginalization of communities and people that lead to this? What is this, a political will issue? Because we all are happy, as you said, to do the knee-jerk thing, which is to get legislation to punish people, to punish people, to punish people. But we're not doing the proactive things to stop even a consideration of punishing them, because if we keep them away from crime in the first instance, we wouldn't have the problem. Is there a lack of political will, is my question here.
My view, but I have to be careful to say it is my personal view, is that it is not a lack of political will problem, because certainly if you listen to the speeches made by the present Prime Minister, you would realize that he has a good grasp of the state of play in this country.
Yes, indeed.
But we need to understand our politics. Our politics does not work by electing a Prime Minister who then waves a magic wand and gets things done. To a large degree, this is not a lack of political will, it's a lack of people will. And that is what scares me. It scares me because when I look at the righteous indignation of Trinidadians and Tobagonians at what is going on in America, it tells me that we know what is right and what is wrong. But when I look at their indignation or lack of any indignation or reaction to what is happening here every day, it tells me that whilst we know what is right and what is wrong, we don't care whether it's applied here or not. And the conclusion that a cynic might reach is that is because we wish to participate and we think it is easier to participate in an unjust, corrupt system.
Well, I
beg your pardon.
No, I'm sorry, sir. I thought you were finished. Please go ahead.
The way to pay your rent and to buy your groceries and to send your child to school in Trinidad and Tobago is to participate actively in a corrupt system. That is where we are. And you will find that we are outraged that Alton Sterling is murdered on camera, but we are silent when it happens here, and we pluck from the air the narrative that they, whoever they might be, have a dependency syndrome. We need to deal with the criminals. But the same country in which Alton Sterling was murdered is a country in which members of Congress are indicted every week.
That's right.
In Trinidad and Tobago, we do not have a single conviction for corruption.
All right, so that is why I unfortunately stepped on you a moment ago, because I do want to go to that situation as to where we see injustice elsewhere and we react. But I think the link here has to be that for some reason we feel we can do something. There is redress somewhere else if we galvanize, but because we lack the integrity in the institutions we have here, we seek not to deal with what is here. I mean, is part of this this citizenry will, as you said, the will of the citizenry to get involved, you said, as against political will. I accept that. But is it part of this because of the apathy, because so many institutions have failed us and continue to fail us all the time, or are undermined and diluted?
I think that your question is very interesting, but there are several layers. But first, let me put this out for your listeners to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a question of apathy, or is it positively participating in the corrupt system? Apathy is a lack of concern. Mm-hmm. But when I combine what I see in Trinidad and Tobago, we are outraged when persons abroad are murdered, when persons here are killed by the police, and communities mobilize asking for nothing more than a proper, transparent investigation. Absolutely nothing happens. So I am afraid for my people. I am afraid for Trinidad and Tobago that our identity is leaning towards being a dishonest group who are not prepared to activate, to protect our constitution and our own people. And it is a constitutional issue, it's a democratic issue. Our Constitution refers to social justice as being one of the premises upon the basis of which we intend to live.
Foundations.
We don't have social justice here. And I think that very often, and I am guilty of it, in our discussions in Trinidad and Tobago, we over-intellectualize. So again, let me attempt to put it in a stark way. How can you live in a country where a 5-year-old girl is sexually abused and murdered?
Mm-hmm.
Go out and conduct your business every day. Patronize the wine bars of Port of Spain and hit social media to express outrage at the murder of a black American. You can over-intellectualize that for me. What we have is a constitution that is only effective as to half of it. And that is the half that tells us that each 5 years we elect a government. The executive power resides in the cabinet. We will have a president. The rest of it, which is designed to ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago have basic deliverables, is ineffective and indicate is not working. As a democracy, we are a false democracy because the citizens have nothing more than a government to point to. 5-year cycle after 5-year cycle. And that is something, to return to your original question, that cannot be fixed by Dr. Keith Rowley. It has to be fixed. You see, his function as Prime Minister is to bridge the gap between big business, who run the affairs of the private sector, to bridge the gap between big business, the public sector, and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. He cannot do that without a voice coming from the citizenry saying, this is what needs to be done. And we need to get it done on a non-negotiable basis.
Very serious indictment, that statement that maybe we are participants in this and that, incidentally.
But we are.
And yes, that's consistent with what the Prime Minister himself said when he said we all have to look at the dishonesty within ourselves before we start approaching, correcting what we see.
What do you tell a mother whose 18-year-old son is one of the persons incarcerated under the anti-gang and bail legislation? When she looks up and she sees people in high office who leave unresolved questions for the public as to the expenditure of public funds, when she sees every week in the newspapers serious allegations of corruption, but there is not a single conviction, nobody is being held without bail. Is that not injustice? Is it not inequality? And nobody is talking about socialism. What people are talking about is dealing with a problem beforehand. We don't want to reach where America has reached, where we wish to import an identity from. We want to be a country, and we have the talent here. We have great intellects in Trinidad and Tobago. We have talent in music, art, literature. We don't use it. We want to be a country that looks forward, and we want to ask ourselves what is happening with, or what is going to happen in 10 years or 15 years' time with the resentment that we are nurturing in this country. How are we nurturing the resentment? We have no consequences for raping the treasury. Heavy and serious consequences for the poverty struck should they make an error. And it is an untidy thing to articulate, because it may appear to persons that we're saying, no, well, you have to look at the criminals with a sympathetic eye. No one is saying that. What people are saying is, look beneath the crime, and you will find that there's a problem there festering that is likely to explode.
Your point is well taken. When I speak of, and sometimes when I, like I speak of will, for instance, I find that it obtains not just here. Parties that get in governance for some reason or the other, and this is not an indictment of the present party in power now, I'm not saying that, but they seem to be reluctant to go about doing that same corruption correction because of fear when the next 5 years, if the table turn, that the same thing will be doing. So many folks are saying, in fact, what they're doing is holding the firewall against that sort of indictment should it happen during their tenure.
Well, you are right. I don't understand, and there are people, other observers, I think, who might understand it better than me, why we have not been able, over decades of obvious corruption, to achieve a single conviction for a corrupt act. I don't understand it. I know that there are difficulties. Legally, you have to have adequate evidence in order to determine that someone ought to be prosecuted. But I think in the evidence collection, unless I am misunderstanding what I have been reading about in this country for decades, should be a simple business. So I can't explain it.
Well, it's the two sides of a problem here. Attorney Justin Phelps is my guest, and we're talking about the problem of setting the ship straight. I mean, you articulated something where there is a new normal, or definitely a different normal, where you say the citizenry finds accommodation for the corruption because they are part of it. Now, the issue is extricating the population from something that is to their detriment. How do we go about doing that?
Well, it is regrettable, but it is what the evidence is. Look at our country. A democracy depends on several things, many of them outside of the Constitution. They are called institutions, which the citizens are entitled to rely on. What has happened to our institutions? The media has been infiltrated. There are serious questions as to sections of the media being politicized, to the extent of having received tangible benefits.
We shan't house that problem here, yes.
Yes. Then you have the Director of Public Prosecutions. He is an independent institution. Our last government tried to politicize that office. The Police Complaints Authority, we have an independent head, jointly appointed, or I beg your pardon, but appointed by consultation with Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, and the last government tried to politicize them. Democracy as well depends on the voice of the people, and the way that is channeled, one of the ways that is channeled is civil society. But what has happened with our civil society? It is the picture that is beginning to emerge of our civil society is that it is merely another route into politics and government. The best example of that was the Keith Noel 146 committee, the leader of which subsequently became a minister of government. Nothing happened to the crime situation. So our civil society is compromised, our media is compromised, our institutions are under attack from politicians. And I think that one of the things that we need to understand carefully is that the institutions do not have to compromise themselves. The politicians go at these institutions. And a classic example is the PCA. The then Prime Minister, Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, positively supported the appointment of the head of the PCA. Mm-hmm. After it became an expedient for her politically, she tried to politicize the office. And that's an extremely important office. And it ties back to the Law Association's position on the bail bill. One of the points the Law Association made is that we have a situation where if we have a corrupt police officer, you could have a victim of a corrupt police officer incarcerated for a substantial amount of time without any recourse in the courts. So what we need is to have a bundle of legislation and policies that work together to fight crime. And one of the things would be to strengthen and improve the powers of the PCA so that they are more effective. And that, too, ties back into the point about the Alton Sterling execution. We will find that once we start to educate our people about what democracy is, everything ties into everything else, and we can do quite a tidy show of being a happy, prosperous country with the resources that we have.
Well, a couple of things. One of the reasons I invited you here is to do exactly that. I believe the more we open the door to these kind of discussions and folks can sit and speak about it, is the more informed the citizenry becomes. And of course, if they are more informed, we start going somewhere. But I do want to go back to earlier when I made the point about political will and the integrity of the institutions here. I concur with you. The Prime Minister seems committed and with the political will to get this done. Here, going back to the institutions. If in fact you say, at which I'm in concert with, that we have folks who are participating in the corruption because that's the way they eat their food, as it were, but it's at some point, in order to get this situation with some direction, we are going to have to strengthen these institutions. The PCA is one, the Integrity Commission is another. We've got to find a way to do that because only then the citizenry sees recourse. And if you see recourse, then you find that you start believing again, or you feel there is a change coming. But it must start from somewhere. And while it is good to say an informed citizenry is the best protector of democracy, it is also true to say that somebody's got to take the helm and get some institutions organized in such a way that the citizenry can once again believe.
Yes, and I think that could properly be the subject of legislation. I mean, I am speaking spontaneously, but I would make it a criminal act to try and politicize our independent institutions. For example, you do not look at a police complaints authority, a very important office because it regulates the police force that implements or oversees the rule of law and public order. Mm-hmm. You do not say about the independent holder of the PCA, well, look, you are a PNM. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Similarly with the Integrity Commission, we need to overhaul the Integrity Commission, populate it with persons that everyone is satisfied are independent, and insulate it from politicization. And I think that could properly be the subject of legislation.
We shall watch that and see where it goes. I hope that you do not stay very far from the telephone because I have exhausted the time with you this morning, but this is something that I would like to revisit with you. There are so many components once we open the door on this that I would like to explore, and I hope that you would be available for the next time I hit the telephone and ask you to make yourself available.
I'm sure I will. May I just say one final thing about the discussion that we've had?
Yes, please go ahead.
The point ought to be made to everyone in Trinidad and Tobago of whatever sector they are in, including big business and everyone else, that it is in everyone's interest that some equality and justice be brought to bear by whatever means necessary, to use the famous Malcolm X phrase, in Trinidad and Tobago. It is a mutually beneficial thing that should be done.
And you're quite right, because even those who feel that they are protected behind the gates, there will become a time when the real estate will push you to the end of the hill and you'll have no place to go.
That's right.
There used to be one time when people called in, I use it only because of the stigma they put on it, not because it deserves that stigma. But there used to be a time that people would say, oh, this is in Laventille. Trinidad and Tobago seem to be becoming a Laventille expansion or extension.
Well,
so it's everybody's issue.
Those people have been unfairly treated and stigmatized.
That's right.
And something will have to give. And I think taking advance action is probably the way to avoid a calamity.
That is the causation we spoke of earlier. Attorney Justin Phelps, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning. You have yourself a pleasant day and a pleasant week, sir.
Thank you.
I thank you very much. My name is Rennie Bishop. I want to thank you all so much for joining us inside Brunch this morning. You are invited to be with us next week at the same time. That's 10 a.m. when we do it. Let me thank all my guests for being here this morning. We started out the morning with Ian Ramdani. Thank you so much for being with us. We went on to the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee. Thank you so much for being here. We had, of course, the man who will be taking Trinidad and Tobago into their first sojourn into the Olympics. Mr. Litterian, thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate it so much. You all come around and join us Monday through Friday from 6 until 9 o'clock for the 107.7 morning show. I am Rennie Bishop. Have yourself a wonderful day.
107.7